Imagine, Episode 2 by Bernard King and Nicholas Lumarine. The two J's, Jemma and Jerome, have fired up an illicit love affair. But Jerome, out of his skin, out of his bubble, is in a seedy bedroom with a high-gloss lady. Weird, strange, or way out? What will be the next demand from Jet Set Jemma? I'm so lucky we met. It was the opening, the moment. Now was the time to ask his question. But his dither was too long before he asked. Because, now it was her to pause. She had gone, detached by thoughts, whisking her away, leaving just her intent gaze at nothing. Wherever she had gone, it was serious, serious enough for her to hide her anguish now behind closed eyes. The white of her knuckles, as they closed around her glass, took his eyes off their repeated tour of her body. Then she was back. Her smile reappeared, and she took his hand. More anticipation to enjoy, Jerome. Her smile broadened into a grin. One day I shall tell you. Her hand still touched his lightly. Should he turn his over and clasp, or move to stroke her cheek? The answer was in the champagne. Why don't you pour yourself another glass, Jerome? The bottle was beside her side of the bed. She could have passed it across. But her question was also an order, and as Jerome was quickly learning, Jemma Lumarine never spoke without reason. She enjoyed watching his walk around the bed. The rise and swell of her breasts quickened noticeably, a sight that increased his tremble as he picked up the wine bottle. She shook her head as it proffered invitation, covering her glass with the palm of her hand. One glass lifts, the second dulls. The musical tinkle from the bottle and his glass, conducted by his trembling hand, was fair evidence, he considered, of his urgent need for a dose of dulling. Next week I will keep my clothes on, and you will not. His return to his side of the bed had been scrutinized as intently as his departure. So, that was the second time he had been assured that there would be a next week. But supposing he did not want to play her game, supposing he just wanted an ordinary affair, supposing he refused to take orders, supposing he refused to wear a stupid uniform. The question churned across his thoughts once more. Men queued to be picked up by a woman like Jemma. She could hire and fire, use, drop, twist, and bait the majority of the male population of the country as she wished. Wealth brought that sort of power and confidence. Her apparent brief glance at his house had not been one of disinterest. She had noted his address and so got his name. Had she followed him onto the bus? Had her pickup been planned, or had her handbag really fallen between them? Her hand moved onto his knee. I have a husband waiting. It wasn't a confession or a reveal, but the mention of her husband changed Jemma Lumarine. For a second, Jet Set Jemma vanished again, and a lost little girl shivered before him. Her hand tightened, squeezing the skin on his kneecap into a tight ridge. Then the gloss, controlled and bright, shone back on. I shall get dressed in the bathroom. Ignoring his puzzled stare, she slipped her hand under the neat pile of clothes and with a tight smile pressed the door closed behind her. So, their first tryst was over. He had sat in the cafe worrying. Would he be good enough? Would they click? Would she be disappointed? Would he upset her? He had been wasting his time. With Jemma Lumarine, anticipation was everything, and also she was impossible. She undressed in front of him, yet she was getting dressed in the bathroom. She was obviously terrified of her husband, and yet she was starting an affair with another man, and sexually different, strange, weird, surprising way out. The descriptions offered themselves, but a choice was not necessary. They all fitted Jemma Lumarine. Absently, He crossed to the window and stared out at the panorama of red London brick of the neighbouring building, the nearness of which deftly increased the claustrophobia of the small room. The bottle, 3/4 full, leaned against the leg of the bedside cabinet. He was not a champagne Charlie. His 20 years in the army, 5 of them in a sergeant's mess, had been lubricated with beer. Beer was macho, cutting through the dust and pandemonium of battle. Champagne was for the officers and their ladies on peaceful lawns to which he was seldom invited. But even he knew Krug. The label glinted gold as he placed the bottle on the bedside table. It was the tops. He had stared often in amazement at the price on the supermarket shelves. Rich woman, poor security guard, and ex-soldier. What a mix. What the hell was he doing with her, and what interest was he to her? She was talking. Her voice filtered from the bathroom through the thin door. He could just hear the modulation of her voice, but not her words, seemed one-sided, as if she was giving orders, probably to one of her 20 gardeners on her country estate. His thought, bitter and mean, brought a frown. Why did he feel bitter? He was disappointed, frustrated. No, not frustrated. The last half hour had been too weird for that. Intrigued? Of course he was intrigued. Whilst he hadn't expected her to rip off his clothes in mad passion the moment he entered, he was disturbed by the space she fashioned between them with her orders. I shall settle the room. The $1 million lady was back, swishing across the room, zipping up her hold-all. His protest was stopped with a frown. It's my fun, Jerome. I shall pay. She held out her hand. You will come next Wednesday? She wasn't asking, yet it wasn't an order. For the first time, her tone carried a curl of anxiety. She had reloaded with perfume, and her nearness was stoking his confusion again. Her hand squeezed his. He waited for sanity to sweep back and rescue him from the incongruous scene. She had changed the atmosphere from way out to way back with the offer of a simple handshake. Her talents seemed boundless. All for you. Her nod from the half-closed door was towards the champagne, before, with a gentle click, she was gone. His watch told him he had been in the bedroom half an hour. The emotion he had expended with Jemma in that short time had exhausted him, and they had not even had sex. He slumped on the bed, lay back and wondered. He had dithered for 2 days after she had pressed the card into his hand outside the house, twisting it 10 times between his fingers before he had opened his phone and recorded her details. Typing her name, number and address seemed to him to be signing a contract, agreeing their relationship would continue. But he did not do relationships or contracts, and he did not do girlfriends. He did solitude, suspicion, and selfishness. Whether he was right or wrong did not matter. It had to be like that when you were born with a triple dose of loyalty. Hadn't he already tried to evade Jemma? He had told her he lived with his wife, expecting her sudden loss of interest. Instead, he got back what he considered were 2 negatives. Jemma giving him her card, and now she believed he had a wife who no longer existed. He looked for a beer in the small drinks fridge that served also as a bedside table, his side of the room, but it was empty. The owners not only had a small and shabby hotel, they were either inefficient or distrustful or both, which is why they had a small and shabby hotel. He had chosen the place on price. He chose everything on price. He spent his life comparing prices. So he blended with the sparse utility interior. In fact, he felt shabby and small and sparse and utility. He poured the glass of champagne thoughtfully. He needed something to drink, anything that would do to help digest his newly formed opinion of himself. An opinion that had been born with the contrast of being next to jet-set Jemma. Had he not come to this hotel and spent half an hour with Jemma, Jerome Archer would have drifted on. No, he did not like the thought of drifting. He was not a drifter. It took a hard thought and a swig of half the glass to dig out the word mooch. Yes, that was perfect. That was him. He was a moocher. He had been a moocher since that day 5 years ago he killed half his company in Iraq. The memory roared, the pain snapping closed his eyes, but then sinking as quickly as it had surfaced, sunk by the weight of his guilt, as it always was. He drained his glass and poured another. Taking Jemma's card from the fridge top, he slipped it back into his wallet. Now, apparently, it was his link to a weekly afternoon relationship that was taking him down a path that had turned off the road marked normal. This route climbed the hill to expectation and excitement, and he was not turning back. He had called her at 8 in the evening. It was the hour loneliness hit. After showering and changing after work, but before being busied preparing dinner. Sometimes the lonely hour stretched to 2 or 3, and dinner never arrived. His glass of whiskey would multiply by 7, goaded by the thoughts of his ex-wife, his army disaster, and life in general. He would wake at 11, too tired to do anything but crawl into bed. Hello? Jemma Lumarine? Problem. He had her card, but he had not introduced himself. But the pause had been brief. I do believe it. Her voice brightened 2 octaves. It's the man on the bus. You're fantastic. Fantastic? Momentarily, her delight threw him further. No one had ever called him fantastic before. We must meet. Why don't you choose the hotel and call me back? His confused reply died in the mouthpiece. She had gone, leaving him with just a lonely wail. Jemma Lumarine did not waste her words or time. But of course she wouldn't. She didn't drip money and class and live in Berkeley Square by accident or luck. Jemma Lumarine obviously made things happen, like the churn of excitement building in his stomach. She did not know him, and yet they were meeting in a hotel room. Okay, so he looked good. The right weight, the right height, tight jaw, and pretty tidy everywhere. He had to be for his job. Sleek, polished, confident, worldly. The adjectives of the rich and successful slipped out easily, but uncomfortably, describing exactly what he was not. So for the moment he had to assume Mrs. Lumarine was looking for a bit of slumming. The meet in the hotel room short-circuited the pretentious crap. It would be straight down to business. S for sex was the capital here. But, he reflected, it was not very flattering to be regarded as a middle-aged toy boy. But, he reflected again, that was only his opinion. Maybe Mrs. Lumarine had fallen madly in love with him on the lower deck of a crowded 65 bus. But, he reflected yet again, that would be stretching fiction into farce. He had chosen the first hotel as it was near her flat, or maybe house, in Berkeley Square. 5-star was out, 4-star was out, and even the 1-star he had chosen was £180 a night, without breakfast. He never ate it, and assumed she would leave before it. But it would not clash with the lady's obviously high standards. Oh no! Her tone was definite, sharp and final, even through the phone. Much too close, much too public. Too close to what? Her flat or house? And maybe her family? And why too public? Had the lady something to hide? He was on a voyage of discovery here. Could we not find one out of town and a little more cosy? To the jet set, Waterloo was suburbia, so Hammersmith would be deep countryside, and if the room was described as cosy, not tiny, his choice had fitted Jemma's request. He swirled the champagne around the glass. The bitter taste was taking over his mouth. He needed a beer to get rid of the taste. He could not even finish what was left in the glass. Tipping it empty into the sink of the tiny bedroom, he froze. Thank you. The words were a surprise. What they were written on was a shock. Her Majesty the Queen, smiling yet not, stared out from the red flush of a £50 note. Prostitute, gigolo, toy boy. The titles bounced back at him from his astonished gaze into the bathroom mirror. He should be upset. Only £50. Is that all he was worth? He should be furious. It was an insult. But he knew it was not. He must expect anything from Jemma Lumarine. If he thought he could stay cuddled in his comfort zone when she was around, he'd better think again. They lived on different planets. She was pointing north, he was facing south. She lived while he existed. If he continued their relationship, one of them was going to have to change. Folding the note into his wallet, he paused. There would be no problem. He had already started and was looking forward to next Wednesday, to return her money, amongst other things. Chapter 2. Jemma Lumarine had been taught at school by her parents and by life in general that most of the time snap decisions brought snappier problems. She could, and often did, when life was biting, trace the cause of her angst back to a moment of madness, a surge of false confidence, or trust without thought. Her daily reminder of her breaking this rule was her husband, Nicholas. And her husband, Nicholas, was the reason she was following Jerome Archer. Obviously, she could have any man she wanted. Although never actually committed, she had come very close on many occasions to adultery. Now she had reached the point where it was necessary. Not wanting to make the same mistake again and ending up with a lover as problematic as the one she had married, this time she was using experience to drive her research. Love had got in her way of yes to Nicholas, but it would not happen again. She realized that to find someone both physically and mentally attractive was pretty hopeless, as so far, during her 43 years, it had not happened. But this was not about dreaming, sharing, and holding hands through thick and thin, introducing to friends and family, and living the norm. Her motive was far more serious. Control, purpose, and achievement were her three paths that would converge at the finish. But she was now approaching the urgency level. 7 men had been scrutinized and 7 men rejected. She realized her standards were at odds with themselves. The necessary male had to fit her qualifications, which were, she knew, quite high. But he had to fit exactly. The target had to be low-level material. Ambitious high flyers, handsome hunks, and the highly talented were not required. She was attractive, electrically so. Her blonde hair, slim silhouette, designer clothes, and her general aura of quality attracted the lads, boys, and men by the trouserful. A difficult problem, she thought, at the beginning of her search. But no, it set a standard. The men she wanted would not have the ambition to even think of looking at her twice, convinced they did not have the necessary presence to be noticed by such a goddess. Now, she thought, she had found a candidate. Her quarry was in a queue at the bus stop. By allowing a woman to push in front of her, she was able to watch 3 feet behind him and inspect. His stance was disciplined, unlike the rest of the queue, peeping over each other's shoulders to hasten the arrival of the bus. He was a motionless rock. Unusually, his bolt-upright carriage, his walk, his pace, and confident movement had impressed instead of the usual physical features. He had emerged from an office block just in front of her. The offices were a multinational bank, but although his suit was dark and smart, the desk-induced slouched office pallor and the suspicious spidering of the banker were not present. He could be a client, she reflected, but he did not look moneyed. His suit was not well cut, the shoulders were too square, and the waist of the jacket ill-fitting. His shoes, Jemma considered shoes were a mirror of their owner's character, were nearing the end of their life, with heels well rounded by many pavements. She was lucky. As the bus arrived, a couple vacated a double seat, and, with a jab in the ribs of the woman who queue jumped her, she was able to wriggle past and sit beside the man in the dark suit. Now, close to her quarry, she could answer some of her questions. Was this the man she needed? Could she sleep with him? Could she control and manage him? Would he last to the finish of her project? And finally, more importantly, could she make him fall in love with her? He looked after himself. His nails were manicured, and he had tucked up the knees of his trousers as he sat down, so his appearance he considered important. His face was hidden, turned away, looking out of the window. His hands clasped neatly in his lap, with his knees tidily touching, presented a relaxed man with none of the usual signs of tension apparent. He was different. Why, she was not sure, from the last few men she had been surveying and thought possibly worth pursuing. Mentally, she went through her checklist. He had most of the ingredients for her recipe. It was time to start mixing. She could not speak to the back of her neck, so the neck must be made to turn towards her. Moving her bottom towards the aisle allowed her to move her bag off her knee. The jolt of the bus ensured it tumbled untidily between them. "I'm sorry." With a smile, she pulled her bag back up. His return smile of acceptance for her apology was polite and automatic, but his turn back to gaze out of the window was hurried. Obviously, he did not want eye contact. Good. He was probably shy. Excellent. The haircut, the steady, if brief stare from cool blue eyes, the general air of confidence that seemed to surround him gave her a clue to his difference. Coupled by the way he carried himself and moved, she realized she had seen this all before, with soldiers on parade. This man had been in the military. Perfect. A prospect with built-in discipline. This one might be worth picking up. He must be made to speak. After shoes, Jemma considered accent, tone, and voice modulation exposed 50% of a person's character. "Excuse me." Suddenly he filled the window, his smile adding to his apology. She tried to place his accent, but geography was impossible from just 2 words. He stepped aside as he eased past her and made for the exit. Decision. Should she or shouldn't she? Her hesitation was brief. So far he was the pick of the bunch, and she was running out of time. A second's pause allowed him to step off the bus, giving her distance to shadow him. His walk was deceptive, seemingly a steady gait, but it had her almost jogging to keep up. She was ready. Yes, she would start phase 1. Hating cliches, but not being good at ad-libs or quick and clever quips, she used movement for her introduction. Tunneling her hand between his arm and body, she pressed close into him, real close, intimately close, ensuring the swell of her breast caressed his arms. "So where are you taking me?" She spoke straight ahead for better effect. Imagine just how long it will be before you hear the next episode on this podcast.